Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with DiceyReview.com, and tonight we're going to be looking at how to play The Pursuit of Happiness. This game was released by Stronghold Games and Artipia Games. To begin setup, place the board in the middle of the table within easy reach of all players. Next, find and separate the project, item activity, job, and partner cards. Place these piles next to the board, close to their designated rows. The job and partner cards are double-sided to allow for more choice when choosing. The game includes a cover card to make sure you know which stack is which. Place the cover cards on top of the respective stacks. Each player chooses a player color and then takes all of the provided player pieces of that color. Each player will take 6 of the hourglass markers in their color, and the 3 remaining hourglass markers will be placed near the board, as they will more than likely be able to be used throughout the game. The players will place their long-term happiness cubes on the space marked 0. Then each player will place a cube in the middle of the short-term happiness track and on the stress track, in the box with the 2 indicated arrows. Place the round marker on the first round marked teen. Place the 3 unavailable action markers on the overtime, start relationship, and get job spaces. Shuffle the life goal cards and deal out as many as the player count next to the board. Shuffle the child trait cards and deal 2 to each player. The child trait card will give the controlling player a special ability that they may use throughout the game. The child trait card will also detail the player's starting resources. Players will need to gather these resources from the supply. After looking at the 2 child trait cards, the player will select one to keep and the other will be returned to the box. Take the provided creativity tokens, influence tokens, knowledge tokens, coins, and reminder cubes and form a supply next to the playing area. Finally, give the first player marker to the oldest player. The Pursuit of Happiness has 3 phases: the upkeep phase, the action phase, and the end of round phase. In the very first upkeep phase, many of the normal steps won't take place, but we'll quickly highlight what players need to do to set up the board at the start of the game. In the first round of the game, the round marker will not be moved. The job row and the partner row will not be populated with cards in the very first upkeep phase. In the 2-player example that we're showing here, 3 cards are dealt to both the project and the activity rows. After dealing out these cards, the very first upkeep phase is done. Next, we'll look at phase 2, the action phase. During the action phase, beginning with the start player and then continuing clockwise, players will take one of their hourglass markers and place it on one of the available action spots to take an action. Once a player has placed one of their tokens, they will take the specified action and then play will pass to the player in a clockwise direction. If a player were ever to place one of their hourglass markers where they already have an hourglass marker, they are forced to take 1 stress. This is a negative thing, and we'll explain why in a few minutes. In addition to placing their markers on action spaces on the board, players are also allowed to place their markers on cards that they may have in front of them, depending on what card type it is. Placing a marker on one of the cards in front of you will allow you to take a number of different actions, and it's important to note that if a player wants to activate one of their cards multiple times, they don't take stress for taking actions there. So in this instance, the green player would not receive 1 stress for placing a second pawn on this card. This is different from the main board, where players will always take stress if they place their marker where they already have one. Now that we've talked about some general rules regarding placement of player pawns, let's look at each one of the different actions that a player can take in detail. When a player visits the study, play, or interact action spaces, the player simply gains the listed resources from the supply. So if a player were to visit the study, they would gain 3 knowledge. If a player were to visit the play space, they would gain 3 creativity tokens. And if they visited the interact space, they would gain 3 influence tokens. If a player visits the temp job space, they are able to take 3 coins from the supply and place it near their playing area. The overtime space will allow players to gain 2 hourglass markers that they can use in the current round. This space is unavailable in the very first round of the game, and it's unavailable from round 6 on. When a player visits this space, they gain the 2 hourglass markers, but at the cost of 2 stress. So if a player went to this space, they would immediately have to move up 2 spaces on the stress track. Now that we've looked at some of the more straightforward actions, let's take a look at the take project, spend, get job, and start relationship actions, as these are a bit more involved. If a player chooses to take a project, players are allowed to select one of the available project cards to place in front of them for a number of different bonuses or rewards. When players take one of the project cards, they will have an option between 3 possible cards. A basic project card, which you can see on the left, a group project card in the middle, or a single round project card on the right. Each one of these cards is treated differently, so let's look at each one and how they work. There are 4 different levels to a basic project card and a single round project card. Basic project cards must always start at level 1. Which means in this instance, any player wishing to take the Online Guild project card would need to start out at the Noobs level at the very top. To take this card, you would go to the Take Project action space on the board. You would then select the Online Guild card, pay the 2 influence required, and gain the 2 creativity as a reward. Once this card is taken from the project row, it's instantly replaced. A player will mark the level of their basic project card by placing a reminder cube on the top row. If a player wants to, later, even in the same round, they can place one of their markers on the project card and then increase it to the next level to gain the shown rewards. For instance, with the Online Guild card, a player could pay 3 influence to then gain 3 creativity and a long-term happiness or a victory point. Once they do this, they could then move their reminder cube up to show that they've completed level 2. If a player wanted to come here later on in the game or even in the same round, they could put another player marker there, pay the resources shown to gain the reward on level 3, and so on. If a player ever achieves the last level of a basic project card, the time markers are placed in the spent time space of the action board, and then the project card is removed from the player's play area and placed aside to show that it's completed. A group project card works a bit differently than the basic project card. Group project cards can be completed and fulfilled by anyone at the table. The person wanting to initially take the group project card would first place their marker on the Take Project space on the action board, and then that player would move their time marker to any one of the squares on the group project card. For instance, this player could say that they want to be the musician in the Game Jam group project. They would place their marker on that section of the card, paying the costs and gaining the rewards on the right. On a future turn, the same player or any other player around the table could, if they wanted to, first place their marker on the Take Project action spot, and then move that placed marker to any one of the remaining spaces on this group project card. For instance, the blue player could place their time marker on the Take Project space and then take the Game Designer role on the group project card. The blue player would be required to pay 2 knowledge and 2 creativity to gain 2 influence and 1 long-term happiness or 1 victory point. No player can ever take more than 2 roles in a group project. So for instance, the green player could take another role if they wanted to, but they couldn't fulfill the final 3rd role because you can only have 2 on 1 group project. Once group projects are taken, they only last 1 round. At the end of every round, players will gain additional rewards on a group project if they have placed markers there, depending on how many total markers are on the card. So players will gain the reward whenever they fulfill a role immediately, and then at the end of the round, in this instance, there are 3 markers on this card. You can see on the bottom of group project cards, they have certain rewards that will be unlocked if a number of players placed markers on this card. For instance, if there was only one marker on this card at the end of the round, the player who placed the marker would gain an additional knowledge at the end of the round. If two markers were on this card, the player who placed the two markers would gain a knowledge and a victory point for each marker they have on the card. So you can see the more players that place markers on this card, the more valuable these cards will become. In this instance, we have 3 total markers on the cards, which means these 3 rewards have been unlocked. For every marker on this card, the controlling player will gain those rewards. So in the instance of the green player will gain 2 knowledge, 2 victory points, and 4 coins because they have 2 markers on the card, so these rewards are doubled. In the instance of the blue player, they would gain 1 knowledge, 1 victory point, and 2 coins because they only have 1 marker. If the blue player had placed 2 markers on this card instead of just the 1, all 4 rewards would be unlocked and both players would gain double these rewards because they have 2 markers. The last project card that can be taken is a single round project card. The single round project cards cannot be upgraded. For instance, you can't place a marker on this card and then move 1 level further. When you go to the Take Project action space and select a single round project, you have to pick which level you want to unlock on the card from the very beginning. Once that level is locked in, it doesn't change. So for instance, if the green player wanted to go to the Take Project action spot and gain this single round project card, they would have to pick which level, 1, 2, 3, or 4, that they wanted to pay for and then gain the rewards. Let's say that the green player wanted to fulfill this project at level 2. They could pay the rewards, 1 knowledge, 1 creativity, and 1 influence, to gain 2 coins and 2 long-term happiness or 2 victory points. They could not upgrade this project throughout the rest of the round, and at the end of the round, this project would go away. The next action space we want to look at is the Start Relationship action space. If a player goes to the Start Relationship action space, they can select one of the face-up partners with which to start a relationship. The partner cards are double-sided, so you can flip the card to whichever side you prefer. The cards are identical in the statistics and the rewards. The gender is different on each side. Once you remove a partner card from the board, you do not refill the empty space created by this card. That space is refilled at the beginning of the round. When starting a relationship similar to the basic project cards, you have to begin at the first level, or dating. Whenever you place your reminder cube on the date level, you gain the rewards shown on the right, in this instance 2 influence and 1 creativity. Relationships can be upgraded similar to basic project cards. If a player wants to, on a future turn, they could place one of their markers on this card to upgrade their relationship to the next level. Partners will have certain requirements that must be met before a player can upgrade to the next level. For instance, in Carrie's example, a player must have at least 5 knowledge. If a player meets these requirements and has 5 knowledge in their supply, they can move their cube to the next level and gain the shown resource on the right, the reward. In this instance, the player would gain 1 creativity, 2 influence, and 1 short-term happiness. We haven't talked about short-term happiness yet, but we'll discuss that in a few minutes. Also, we haven't looked at what the icons on the left side of the card mean yet, as that is part of upkeep costs, which we'll cover in the next upkeep phase. Partner cards will remain face up in front of a player until they choose to discard them or until they are no longer able to fulfill the upkeep costs, which once again we'll discuss in a few minutes. The next action space to look at is the Get Job action space. When a player places their action marker on the Get Job action space, they will be able to select from one of the face-up job cards. Job cards come in a variety of different types. A job card will have a category. There are 3 different categories: arts, social, and science. In the 2 examples we have here, we've seen an arts job and a social job. Job cards are double-sided just like the partner cards.
The stats and the category of the job remain the same on both sides, but when you select these cards, you can pick whichever side you prefer. There's also a level to the card. As you can see, on the top right of the journalist, there is a level 1 icon. On the top right of the 3D artist, there is a level 2 icon. This indicates how expensive the job is to maintain, both in resources and time, and it indicates how much the player will get paid every round. For instance, the level 1 jobs will pay 6 coins, while the level 2 jobs will pay 11 coins. You can take whichever level you want to. You don't have to have a level 1 job before you can get a level 2 job. It is important to note, however, that if you have a level 1 job, you can gain a level 2 job by using the promotion action on the card, which we'll discuss here in a moment. Let's say in our instance, the player is going to select the journalist job, a level 1 social job. The player will not fill in the empty space that was created by selecting this job, just as with the partner cards. The player would pay the 4 influence required to take this social job and then immediately gain the 6 coins from this job. Once again, we're going to ignore the upkeep costs on the left side of the card for now, as that has to do with the upkeep phase. If a player wants to gain a promotion to gain a level 2 job, they can do so just so long as there is a job in the same category that is 1 level above their current job. So in this instance, our journalist is a level 1 social job. But let's say in a future round this level 2 social job came up, the politician. The player, if they wanted to, could utilize the promotion action space on their level 1 social job card to promote themselves to a politician. In the display right now, there's a politician, a level 2 social job. So the requirements are met. There is a level 2 job that has the same category, the social category. What a player could do if they wanted to is they could place their marker on this card to take the promotion action. The player would be required to pay 6 influence, and they would immediately gain the rewards shown on the right, 3 coins and 3 victory points, or long-term happiness. After they do this, the action pawn that they used to take the action would go to the spent time space on the board. They would then immediately get to put the politician card in front of them, and the journalist card would be discarded. The new job would then be placed face up in front of them. It's important to note that the player would not gain the 11 coins shown in the reward space of the new job. They would simply gain the reward in the promotion space of their previous job. They would, however, gain rewards during the upkeep phase, which once again we'll talk about in a few minutes. Players are only allowed to have 1 job at a time. If you would want to gain a new job, you can do that, but the new job will just replace the old job. You'll discard this card without any penalty. Now that we've looked at partners, jobs, and projects, I would like to quickly mention that there's a limit to how many jobs, projects, and partners you can have before you start taking stress. If you want to, you can have more than 3 projects, jobs, and partners. But for each one you take on additionally, you'll gain 1 stress. So for instance, in this case, for taking this single round project, this player would gain 1 stress on the stress track. Additionally, a player can have more than 1 partner. But if they have more than 1 partner, they're going to gain an additional stress. So in this instance, this player would gain 1 stress for having 4 total cards, partners, jobs, and projects, and in addition to that, they would gain an extra stress for having 2 partners. The last action space to look at is the spend action space. If a player selects the spend action, they can choose one of the face-up item or activity cards from the item/activity row to put face-up in front of them and gain the reward. Whenever you take an item or an activity from the display, you immediately draw a card to replace it. Items and activities can be differentiated by the label on the bottom of the card. When you take an item or an activity, you indicate the level that you want to purchase the item or activity at and place a reminder cube on that level. So for instance, if a player wanted to, they could buy the garden at level 2 hedge maze, placing a reminder cube on that space, paying the cost on the left and gaining the rewards on the right. In this instance, the player would gain 2 knowledge, 1 victory point, and 1 relax. The relax icon allows a player to move their cube one space back on the stress track. It's important to note that when taking a relax, a player can never move back into a different color. They always have to maintain the same color zone that they started in. It's important to note that many items have upkeep costs at their higher levels, similar to the garden, and we'll discuss those upkeep costs during the next upkeep phase in a few minutes. Activities work in the same way as item cards, except they don't have upkeep costs. So if a player wanted to take this museum activity, they could select any level they want to, pay the costs shown, and gain the reward. For instance, a player could go on the holiday space on this activity card, Museums. A player would have to pay 6 coins, and they would also have to pay an additional time marker on this space. So, in addition to the time marker that they used to take the action, they would also have to play one more time marker on that space as payment. After doing that, they would gain the rewards shown on the right. As a separate action, players can also come to activity cards to upgrade those activities or upgrade the items that they've bought. For instance, if a player wanted to upgrade their garden item from a hedge maze to grounds, they could place one of their markers on the card, pay the costs shown in the ground space, and then gain the reward shown on the right. Players can always advance to a higher level, but they can never gain the rewards from a lower level again. Once a player has maxed out the level on an item or an activity, they can no longer go to these cards with their markers to upgrade to new actions. But that's okay, because there's no limit to how many items or activities a player can have in front of them. A player is not penalized with stress for having more than 3 item or activity cards. Whenever you've maxed out an item or an activity, if you want to, you can put them off to the side, or you can leave them in front of you however you want to. There are situations that will give you bonuses for in-game scoring, depending on the life goals that you've shuffled and placed out. But if you want to have more free space in front of you, you can just keep them in a pile next to your play area. If at any time a player wants to discard a card that's in front of them, whatever the card may be, they can do that. If they discard a card, however, they will gain 1 stress and lose 1 short-term happiness. Now that we've mentioned the short-term happiness track, I want to briefly talk about the benefits and the penalties for gaining or losing spots on this track. The short-term happiness track benefits a player in 3 different ways. The first benefit is the player that is furthest on the short-term happiness track at the end of the round will become the start player for the next round. If there's a tie among players for who is furthest, then whoever is currently sitting the farthest away from the current start player gets to go first. The next thing that the short-term happiness track will do is allow you to pay less or cause you to pay more for upgrading or taking projects. Let's look at the blue player, for instance. They're in the +1 space of the short-term happiness track. This means that the blue player would have to pay 1 less for any project they want to take or upgrade. And this could be 1 less of any of the 3 resources: knowledge, influence, or creativity. In the same way, the green player is on the -1 space. This means that they would have to pay 1 more resource to upgrade or take a project. This could be any resource that they choose: knowledge, influence, or creativity. The other thing the short-term happiness track does for you is it allows you to refresh any row of cards. If you're unhappy with one of the 4 rows of cards, you can spend 1 short-term happiness to completely refill one of the rows. So let's say in this instance, a player wanted to lose one of their short-term happiness and refill the job row. Any card currently in the job row would be discarded, and then the new cards would be filled up based on the player count. In this instance, in a 2-player game, we would put out 2 new jobs. This can be done with any of the 4 rows of cards. If a player ever wanted to move their short-term happiness marker to the left to refresh the cards, and they can't do so because they're on the furthest track, they can instead lose 1 long-term happiness and do the same thing. It's very important that players are careful about doing this, however, because long-term happiness is in-game scoring. The last action space we want to look at is the rest action space. If a player wants to, they can come to the rest action space to move their stress marker 2 spaces to the left. It's important to note that if moving their stress marker 2 spaces to the left would cause them to move into a new color zone, they have to stop. The rest space will only allow a player to move 2 spaces to the left if they remain in the same color zone. Now that we've talked about the stress track, let's look at it in a bit more detail. The stress track is going to be a timer showing how long the player will be able to stay alive. If a player ever has their cube move off the end of the stress track, they immediately die and they can no longer take any actions in the rounds. During the game, if a player is in the higher stress zones, they will have fewer time markers to use in the round. If a player is able to move their marker into the lower stress zones, they will gain a time marker to use in the upcoming round. The rest space and the relax icon will never allow a player to move into a different color zone. There are some cards, however, that have a good health symbol. It's the heart that you see in the bottom of these 4 cards. If a player is ever allowed to complete a project or gain a reward that shows a heart, they are able to move their marker 1 color zone to the left, maintaining the same relative space. So for instance, if the green player were in the middle space of the blue stress zone and they gained a good health, that would allow them to move into the middle space of the light green stress zone. If they were able to gain 1 more good health, they would be able to move to the second space of the darker green stress zone. And then if they were able to gain 1 more good health, they would be able to move to the only section in the darkest green stress zone. This would allow that player to take 3 extra time markers on their future round, and this would allow them to live much longer. Now that we've looked at the action phase and all of the different actions in greater detail, let's look at the end of round phase. During the end of the round phase, the first thing that happens is players will gain their additional rewards for any group projects that they have. So just like we looked at earlier, for having 2 markers on this card each, and since there are 4 total markers on the card, the blue and the green player would each gain 2 knowledge, 2 points, and then a total of 8 coins. After gaining any rewards from a group project, any single round project and group project cards will be set aside by the player. The players will then take back all of the time markers that they've placed on the board and put them in their play area. Any markers gained by taking the overtime action would be returned. Players would then determine first player order by the position on the short-term happiness track. After that, all of the short-term happiness markers would be reset in the middle. At the end of the first round, the 3 unavailable action spaces would be removed from overtime, start a relationship, and get a job. Now these spaces were open during our examples just to show you how they work, but normally these spaces don't come in until round 2. Now that we've looked at the action phase and we've looked at the end of round phase, let's look at an upkeep phase where we actually have to fill in all of the rows. The first thing that happens in an upkeep phase is all of the cards that are currently face up in the display will be removed. The cards will be placed in a discard pile next to their respective stacks. Then the cards will be refilled on their respective row. Advance the round marker 1 space. If a player is not in the central blue zone of the stress track, they will gain or lose a time marker depending on where they are. In this instance, the blue player would lose 1 time marker for being in the yellow stress zone. Players then look to see if they have more than 3 combined project, job, and partner cards in front of them. Once again, item or activity cards do not count against this limit. In this example, the player has 4 total project, job, and partner cards in front of them, so they would gain 1 stress. In addition to that, if a player has 2 partners in front of them, they would gain 1 additional stress on top of the stress gained by being over the limit. Having 2 partners at one time is very stressful. During the last step of the upkeep phase, players will look to see if they have any upkeep costs that they want to or can pay. This could potentially be on item cards, job cards, partner cards. As we can see in this example, the politician job requires this player to pay 2 time markers, 1 creativity, and 2 influence. If they do, they gain 11 coins. This player has not yet advanced their relationship into the second or third step, so there are no upkeep costs currently for that. But if a player was in the second round, or the second level rather, they would pay 1 time marker to gain 3 influence and 1 short-term happiness. If a player is unable or unwilling to pay the upkeep costs on any of the cards in front of them, they will lose that card, gaining 1 stress and losing 1 short-term happiness. Whenever players enter the 6th round from the 5th round, they will enter Old Age. Whenever this happens, the overtime space will be blocked on the board. It will no longer be available. In addition to that, during the first Old Age round, players will take 3 stress. In the second Old Age round, they will take 6 stress. In the third Old Age round, they will take 9 stress. If a player has ever taken stress that will cause their marker to go off the end of the stress track, the player has died, and they no longer take part in the game. If all players have moved off the end of the stress track and died, the game is over. At the end of the game, the player will add the marker on the long-term happiness track. They will gain 1 long-term happiness for each 5 coins they have and any 5 resources of 1 type. So in this instance, this player would gain 2 extra points for their 5 creativity and their 5 coins. Players would then look at the life goal cards. Each life goal card can only be claimed by 1 player. 1 player can claim multiple cards. So in this instance, the green player could claim both of these cards if they meet the requirements first, or the blue player could claim both if they meet those requirements first. These requirements may never be met, but if they are, you will give the bonus to the player who claimed that card at the end of the game. After applying all of the life goal bonuses and giving all players credit for their resources and coins, the player with the most long-term happiness is the winner. In the case of a tie, the player who has collected the most completed cards is the winner.
Alright everybody, that was our video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. If you have any questions about how to play the game or questions in general, you can leave them as a comment in this video or you can email us at thedicey@gmail.com. If you would like to hear more from the Dicey Review, you can listen to the Dicey Review podcast. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and most other podcast apps. You can visit us at our guild at boardgamegeek.com or read our full written reviews at thediceyreview.com. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, we'll see you at the table.